On behalf of the Kinney Corridor Collaborative, we thank you for your interest in the experiences of some other communities in their own dam removal projects. So tonight we'll have a chance to talk with either 3 or 4 of the 5 people that were kind enough to share their thoughts in the video series that you can see on the KinniCC .org YouTube page. David Babcock gets a special kind of medal for editing, for not only shooting those videos, but editing them into a finished form and spending a lot of hours on the captioning. It was a marvelous job, and we learned a lot from him. So I'd like to have a couple of ground rules for tonight's conversation. We're here to learn from these other communities' experiences, perhaps some lessons that we can put to use in River Falls and answer your questions. But it's not a time for us to plow over ground that the city and its residents have covered in discussions about electrical generating dams or licensing by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or what comes next from DNR in relation to the project. We're still in the planning stage for all of those things. So let's talk about how these dam removals affected these communities, what they have now that the dams are out, how the removals gave new resources and new opportunities for businesses in those towns, and what lessons they would offer to us as we go forward. If we get off on what I consider to be a tangent, I'll step in and ask that we move on. These folks have a lot of positive news to share with us, and I hope we can learn from that. I'd also ask that, if possible, you use the chat feature to submit a written question. That way we can get to it as close as you wanted to ask it. Otherwise, you can raise your hand, and we hope, if you have your video on, and we hope that we'll be able to see that and unmute your mic. Judy will be keeping track of hands up and unmuting mics and so on. So, so please keep your mics muted unless you're speaking, and that'll keep the dogs barking from interrupting us, and it'll keep us from telling them to shush. So, and you won't be able to hear the ice cubes in my glass if I'm muted. So let me introduce the individuals that we have on board here who've offered to share their time tonight. I don't know who's in which row, but Bob Martini is going to speak with us about the project to remove the Ward paper mill dam in Merrill. Bob was a project manager for Wisconsin DNR on that project. Mike Palm is the mayor of Baraboo and was active in the community, was a member of a citizens group at the time that the discussion about the dam removals was taking place, and has remained both as a citizen and now as the top elected official in the city. And he has a lot to say about the opportunities for businesses. Heath Beneke is Wisconsin DNR fisheries biologist and river scientist who was the project leader for the removal of the 18-mile Creek Dam in Colfax, Wisconsin. That was just above where the creek flows into the Red Cedar River, and it was a significant benefit to that community to have that project done. So I hope that we'll be joined soon by another individual who was real active in the Baraboo stuff, and that is Joe Van Berkel, former Sauk County conservationist. So we'll get on from the introductions, but let me mention one of our invitees who couldn't make it tonight is Doug Hill, who led the Baraboo Kiwanis Club project to build a walking and biking trail. They were a pretty sleepy civic club, but when the project presented itself, they took it on, and eventually they raised $500,000. They found contributions from hundreds of volunteers and dozens of businesses, and they put up benches and shelters and kiosks, and now that trail is used every single day of the year. Doug said, you need the vision and people with passion, and then people to bring it all together. And not only, he said, did it help the river and the community, but his Kiwanis Club became a lot stronger because it had a visible effective project going. Younger volunteers joined and are providing the leadership, the next generation of leadership to that club now. And he thinks they won't be afraid to envision and carry out another project because they have the example of one that was already done in their community. So, then let's get started. A question came in from KT in River Falls that can give us a little theme for the chat tonight. She asks, what are the main lessons you can offer to us in River Falls from your experiences in your communities with these dam removals? Anybody that wants to start, if you each take a couple of minutes and offer some of those lessons, please feel free.
I think one of the main lessons on any dam removal is that there's a lot of myths out there. People come up with all sorts of ideas. For example, one person at one of our hearings said that the river below the dam would dry up if the dam was removed because all the water came from the pond. So, those kinds of myths are out there in the society, and you have to dispel them with information and data. It's a really good example of how science-based management can overcome problems that occur when you rely on myths or ideas that are not founded. So it was really important to dispel all those myths. Another one was that you'd get blastomycosis when the dam was drawn down. We proved that wrong, but a lot of people in the city were really concerned about that because some people had died of blastomycosis in the county, but it was absolutely not related to dam removal. So I think it's really important to have science-based management to dispel a lot of those myths.
Okay. Okay.
I think it was also really important in that city that the advantages far outweighed the disadvantages of dam removal. The economic impact was positive. The cost would have been prohibitive if they had repaired the dam. There really wasn't any reason for keeping the dam because it was only producing about $35,000 worth of hydro, and it was costing about $50,000 for insurance on the dam, and they had paid $100,000 for flooding damage the year before. The repairs on the dam were $1.2 million, so it was out of the realm of economic possibility to maintain that structure.
Okay.
And yet people wanted it maintained; they just didn't want to pay for it.
Okay. And the owner of the dam in Merrill was a paper company that had bought the local paper company. The paper company that was the buyer, it was out on the West Coast, and they closed the mill down and they wanted to abandon the dam and remove it. But the citizenry said, no, don't do that. But the citizenry wasn't willing to come up with money to pay for it.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
They went to local, federal, and state government. Nobody could kick in the money. The public wouldn't kick in the money. It was simply an economic decision on the part of the paper mill. But the people were angry for the loss of those high-paying jobs to begin with. And when the dam removal hit the city, people were really upset. I counted 140 signs in the city against dam removal, really blaming DNR and the paper company for all these disasters that were going to happen, when in fact turned out to be an extremely positive result. They said that property values would drop. We hired University of Wisconsin to study that issue. Property values actually went up around the former pond. 120 acres of submerged land went to the city and became a great park. There were all kinds of advantages that accrued from avoiding the sunk cost of repairing that dam.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Bob, Mike, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. So no matter what you do, you're going to have some people that will oppose. And, I agree with the previous speaker. We heard, the river would dry up. We also heard that mud flats would be exposed and it would stink and it would be unsightly and we'd see a bunch of old tires and, everything else. So with us in particular, Circus World Museum actually is located right on the river, and there was a mill pond backup that affected Circus World Museum property, and they were really concerned that that would be very unsightly for the visitors, and that um, you know, we would be putting them out of business in effect. And of
Mhm.
course, uh, the river did not dry up. The mud flats were exposed for probably about 3 weeks, and then the dormant seed bank that was in the mud took over, and you know, things greened up in a hurry, and it really wasn't the issues that some of the people that were opposed to the dam removals came to fruition. So, you know, since that time, you know, really a great success story. The river's a lot cleaner. We saw the return of what I consider to be better game fish than what we had before. Obviously, it was very silty with the dams in. Now that the dams are out, the gravel bars have been exposed. They get flushed on a regular basis, and you know that brings in smaller um, feed fish, and then that becomes then nice habitat for holding bigger game fish. So, you know, that in itself is a tremendous plus. Uh, Someone talked about the Kiwanis getting on board. That was a big help for us. I think that, you know, a lot of the Kiwanians are, you know, what I would consider to be the business leaders in town. And, you know, with them on board, they also went to bat and said, you know, really, this is going to be an amenity when it's done, much more than it is now. And, you know, so that helped dispel some of the concern that some of the people had.
Sure.
But again,
Quick-
if you go into this thinking that you're not going to have any opposition, you better think again, because you are, and you
Yeah.
know, you just have to be
Mhm.
prepared for it and deal with it when it comes up.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Heath, what's the Colfax experience? What's your lesson from Colfax?
Yeah, a couple of things, Duke. I think there's kind of three main things that we kind of learned there. And there's like three phases to every project, basically, when these occur. First phase is like the permitting, and then actually the drawdown, and then the sediment management portion. That's like all the stuff you have to do before you actually take the dam out. And then they actually have the physical removal of the structure, and then the final restoration of the stream channel going through that impoundment. And the biggest thing we learned with those three stages, there's probably different players and partners in each stage. So you're going to be working with different people depending on where you're at in that process. And then also a big thing is be patient with the process. There's going to be a lot of curveballs thrown at you, and things are going to have to be adaptable to, I guess, is another good example. Things may pop up that you weren't expecting. An example in Colfax was after we actually removed the structure, we had a city storm sewer pipe and a natural gas line that were exposed going through the impoundment. And so we had to reevaluate that and kind of shift gears and have contractors come in and reset those infrastructure issues we had there. But so we weren't expecting that. Everybody thought, oh, it's plenty deep, don't worry about it. It's down 8 feet and it's not gonna have a problem. And then the dam came out and the sewer lines exposed in the middle of the river. So just be ready for stuff like that. It could happen, it may not, but just be adaptable and then be patient with the process, because it's usually 3 to 5 years from start to finish to get one of these done. Sometimes even longer than that, depending on how many moving parts there are, and a lot of players involved and partners to make it happen. So just be patient, and hopefully good things happen.
Well, and I remember in Colfax, you just became ready, prepared for surprises that you couldn't even guess. That if you're working away on the stream and all of a sudden there's a wire down there and it doesn't show up on any of the village diagrams or maps, or nobody even knows when it was put there, and you don't know if it's actively being used or not. Those are the kind of surprises that it happened in Cross Plains with Black Earth Creek too. But you just it's inherent in urban situations. Thank you. I'm gonna. One of our viewers asks, do the communities have ongoing stream or river studies in the areas where the former impoundments were? Temperature, oxygen, sediment monitoring, wildlife, invasives, others. Anybody want to go at that?
We did that on the Deerskin Dam removal in Vilas County and studied the river for 10 years after the dam was removed. There was an issue with trout. We wanted to see if trout populations improved, whether or not the fish moved in different places, how much they were able to access habitats, between the winter habitat, the growth habitat, and the spawning habitat within the Deerskin River. And those were all positive. We didn't have any adverse effect on the warm water fishery that was there. It really was overall an improvement of the entire system to remove that dam based on the 10 years of data.
Okay. We have a question about, well, and one of the benefits that we have in River Falls is we've got 30 years of monitoring data that's been done by the particular thermal monitoring data that's been done by the Trout Unlimited chapter, and it's been I think a huge factor in the civic considerations leading up to that decision. We also have a question about what ongoing responsibilities did the community, local government, or DNR or others have for maintaining, and I'm assuming that's going to be maintaining the area of the former impoundment. But then there's another side of it, sediment removal or other parts, ongoing responsibilities. Now Heath, Colfax is a village park, and the village maintains it, and the stream is in great shape. There's really not any responsibility except fisheries management oversight for that section of the stream, are there?
Yeah, basically, I think we do, and it kind of relates to the last question too. We do an annual survey in the Old Impoundment Fish Survey. We've done that since 1997, so we got almost 25 years of data going through that section of the river. And also to kind of answer the last one too, the local high school biology teacher uses that stream corridor for like an environmental classroom. So like all dam removals, that options there if you're in a city or a municipality, maybe to have an environmental outdoor classroom in the Old Impoundment and stream corridor. So it's kind of neat that they're doing that. In the case of Colfax, pretty much the impoundment itself, all the landowners that were around that structure quit claim deeds back to the village. So it actually was private ownership when the dam was removed, and we got 40 people to agree to give that land back to the village, which is amazing. I don't know if you'd be able to do that nowadays, but then they were willing to do that to make the project successful. So the village actually owns the whole impoundment bed now, or the old impoundment bed. And they mow that every year, keep it nice and green, and then they leave a riparian buffer along the stream to protect water quality and things like that. But it's pretty much a village ownership. We don't do a lot there anymore other than our fish survey. If something happened there, we'd maybe come in and help fix something, but we haven't had any issues there. Everything has held up really well. That project's been 23 years ago now that we did that work. So.
Okay, thanks.
At the
Bob?
Ward Dam,
Merrill?
the land was ceded to the city by the paper company. It was 120 acres, 2 miles of river, and DNR gave a stewardship grant to develop a park there. The design of the park was such that the goal was to make it as maintenance free as possible for the city. So it was really wildlife habitat, trails, and a few city structures that they needed for some other purpose. But really there hasn't been that much cost considering how many acres of land are involved. The habitat work was actually in stream. It was boulder retards, things like that. Things that had very little maintenance. The structures were really not a problem for the city. On the other hand, the use went way up in the park. And I think the average person living in the area believes it's an asset compared to the shallow sediment-filled pond that they had before, with very little access to the flowage.
Mike, on the Baraboo, tell us a little bit about the land ownership along the river. Is that in city hands, or how is that handled?
The vast majority is in city hands and was prior to the dams coming out. There were a few private property owners along one segment of the river that we actually purchased some riverfront property through the stewardship program in order to be able to put the Riverwalk in. But the vast majority of it already was parkland because it was typically a floodplain anyhow. So there really wasn't a lot down there. Now there was a segment, again, I had mentioned that the area down by Circus Road Museum, that actually belongs to the State Historical Society. But even there, the state owns the property, so it's still available for us to be able to do the things that we needed to do.
Mhm.
I think that it's. I can't speak to other communities because I'm not real sure how the ownership uh, issues were there, but we didn't have a lot of that problem in Baraboo. And again, mainly because a lot of it was under our control to begin with.
Okay, okay. We've had some questions about sediment management, and the Colfax Dam was about 14 or 15 feet high, and the Merrill Dam was probably 20-ish, something like that, 15 or 20.
Mhm.
And how did you handle the sediment management? What's the best time to do it, and who did it?
Well, the Moore Dam situation was much different than the dam upstream. The Prairie Dwells Dam had a 65-foot head, so there was a lot of gradient there. And some of the head walls on the exposed sediment were 12 to 15 feet, very unstable. But they did stabilize over time with just natural vegetation. There was no shaping of the shoreline or anything like that. In the Ward situation, we simply dewatered slowly in the fall. And then by the time springtime came around, we had frozen soils to work on. Very little restructuring there because the gradient was small. By the time 2 weeks were out, it was already starting to get green. And by the time a month went out, we had enough root structure there to hold the sediment in rain events. And as the root structure developed, uh, we just didn't see any reason to redisturb the soils and recontour, mainly because it was a fairly flat area anyway, unlike Prairie Dells, which had quite a steep head.
Sure.
But at
Okay.
Prairie Dells, we had 20,000 cubic yards of sediment. That was our original estimate. We took that out with a sediment trap downstream, but there was still way over 20,000 cubic yards that went downstream. So there was
Mhm.
the downstream area below the dam went from a boulder garden, sediment starved, to a completely covered sand flat all the way down below the dam. And it took almost a year and a half for that to move on down through the system. Uh,
Okay.
but
Yep.
regular rainfall and flood events in the spring took that out in a short period of time.
Okay. We have a question about impact on wildlife like turtles, beavers, frogs, birds, fishes other than trout. How did those streams change? Well, I remember being on in Colfax when it was about a foot and a half deep sand flat above the dam, and there wasn't hardly a fish to be found there. So that's a dramatic change. Now it's a brook trout stream. But tell us a little bit more about other species, and is some of this beaver habitat?
Yeah, I mean, it's in an urban setting, so I mean, some of the wildlife is more like an urban wildlife setting, but there's occasional otter in there now. They come on the Red Cedar River. It's connected to the Red Cedar. We also have a lot of stuff like waterfowl that kind of use that part through town, especially during seasonal migrations now. And then the fish community was probably the biggest thing that shifted there. I mean, we had pretty much a warm water fish community that's shifted to basically like a cool water fish community. And when we did our fish survey work, the IBI scores, which are kind of like your index of biotic integrity, tells you how healthy that system is, went from like a 20 beforehand on a scale of 100 and was 90 afterwards. So we definitely improved the fishery in that section of the river, and it's more comprehensive to what it was before the dam was there. But like in the case of Colfax, with it being such an urban setting, there's not a ton of wildlife there because it's, there's houses all around and stuff like that. But there's some access from the Red Cedar, so otter and stuff like that do frequent that section of the river now. So.
Mhm. Bob?
The Ward Pond was right in an urban area in the city of Merrill, but it became a real birding mecca. People started to really use that area for birding because there was such a wide variety of habitats. The fishery is much better because the dam was less than a mile from the Wisconsin River, Once the dam was taken out, we had a good overlap fishery. The warm water fish came up from the Wisconsin, cold water fish were in the prairie, and at different times of different seasons, they would move back and forth. The smallmouth bass really colonized the upper river above the dam where all those boulder retards are. And then the brook trout from the Prairie River would come downstream to spend time in the winter for winter habitat because the river was larger, even going out into the Wisconsin River, and then coming back into the prairie for the following season. So we had fish moving back and forth. The warm and cold water fishes were overlapping in the river, whereas with the dam there, none of those fish could get to those habitats they needed seasonally. So I think it's a lot more stable fishery than we had before, in addition to a lot more variety.
I think they've found that in dam removals across the country, situations where dams have been impounding or interrupting fish habitat for many years. Perhaps that might be one species that is kind of the signature species in the East Coast. It might be Atlantic salmon, of which there are very few. But what they find when they take out the dam is that millions of shad run up those streams for the first time in 250 years. And so the whole assemblage of migratory fishes, and we're learning and learning and learning about those migratory fishes, get to exercise that migratory tendency where they haven't been able to do that in those for forever and ever. So that's
one wildlife thing. One wildlife incident we observed, people insisted on planting rye in the flats, the bud flats. So we did plant a little bit of rye because they wanted to do it. Well, what happened was when that rye grew up and the seeds were there were all kinds of mice out there, and there was all kinds of cover for the mice. So we saw raptors all over the place after those mice. There were quite a few snakes in there after the mice as well. But I think if we had just left it alone, the natural vegetation would have taken over and there would have been less of that. But people absolutely demanded that rye be planted in those flats. So we did it for them. But, it was an interesting raptor observation point.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you talk about particular fish assemblages that are sort of based on the cold water assemblage, that's trout are sort of the apex species, but there are a lot of white suckers and sculpins and dace and other fish that are attuned to that cold water stuff. And when you start to get to cool water, that's smallmouth bass and walleyes and northerns and in baraboo. Mike and Joe Burkle would tell you the number of species that they saw in the impoundments when there were dams consisted of suckers and red horse and a few minnow species that are attuned to cool water or warm water. And then the number of species that are now in there, now that it's a cool water flowing stream. It's not a trout stream, but it's a smallmouth bass stream. It's a walleye stream. It's a panfish stream. It's got a lot of different species in there. And all the minnow species that go with cool water systems. So it's much more diverse.
I can tell you also that we're actually getting some sturgeon coming in from the Wisconsin River. They're coming up into the gravel upstream. So, it's, I mean, the change has been dramatic. I don't know what else to say. We're seeing walleyes. We weren't catching walleyes before. Smallmouth bass, you get one occasionally. Now it's commonplace. And the amount of people that are actually fishing in the urban setting along the river, right across from my office, as a matter of fact, on a daily basis, I see fishermen out there just about every day, as long as the weather's decent.
Well, and as a sometime paddler, to be on a river that has sturgeon have a tendency to leap out of the water, and if you're paddling along and all of a sudden a 5-foot or 6-foot sturgeon comes up just completely out of the water and whacks down not far from you, it's a startling experience, but it's pretty neat.
Almost sounds like a beaver tail.
It does. We have a question about that sediment load that went down from your projects, did that affect mussel habitat and survival in mussel beds that you know of? Was that a concern on your streams?
We have a lot of fall on the Baraboo River in the area where the dams came out. There's 35 feet of fall in about 4.5 miles. Um, that immediately flushed out. And the gradient then kind of flattens out to get into the Wisconsin, but there's enough water that runs through that river in the springtime that I think those sediment loads were out of there in probably less than a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We didn't do an official study on it, but
Mm-hmm.
you could just tell the quality of the water was getting much better quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Heath or Bob?
But we didn't have mussel studies in the prairie, but on the Wisconsin River, the mussel populations were really bad in the Wisconsin River because of low dissolved oxygen during the polluted days. And they hadn't really recovered all that much by the time this dam removal occurred. But because the fish can move now, they can move those mussel species from the Wisconsin River out into the prairie and upstream, because the fish carry the larval mussels in their gills, and they can move long distances that way. So I think with the dam gone, there'll be a greater chance of reestablishing all the mussel populations that could live in the Prairie River from the remnants in the Wisconsin. So although we temporarily had a lot of sediment problems that probably affected some mussels in the stream, I don't think there were a lot of them below the Prairie Dells Dam, because the area was so sediment starved. There was nothing but rock down below and boulders and gravel. There wasn't a lot of really good substrate for a diverse mussel population. But we didn't actually do studies to determine the impacts there. And the
Okay.
Deerskin River we did, and that was a very healthy mussel population after dam removal.
Good.
There again,
Okay.
we had warm water fishes coming up from the area downstream of the deerskin. And I think over the long term, that will help improve the diversity of mussel species if the fish have access to the entire river system instead of being blocked by a dam.
Okay. Let's talk for a minute about river users. How any of you, Mike, you may have some observations about what you've seen for the changes in use of the river and the area along the river since the dams were taken out.
Okay, well, first of all, kayak use and canoe use on the river has dramatically increased. There actually is a kayak and canoe livery out of North Freedom, Wisconsin, which is 2 villages up from the city of Baraboo. And we have installed a canoe and kayak launch, a very substantial one in Baraboo. There's also one in West Baraboo. There's one on county-owned land between West Baraboo and North Freedom, and then of course there's another one in North Freedom. So none of those existed uh, to any developed state prior to the dams coming out, obviously, because you really couldn't go anywhere. You had this series of dams on the river. But so I had mentioned fishing already. We're seeing fishermen on the regular basis. We're seeing a lot of kayak and canoe usage. And there's also been a lot of economic benefit along the river, other than the kayak rental that's up in North Freedom. We've got a distillery on the river now that is right in the city of Baraboo. It's on a nice, fast flowing segment of the river. We've got a big patio out in the back of the distillery where it's a restaurant also. People can go and have their lunch and watch the paddlers go by. And if there is no paddlers at the time, you get the sound of the water moving by, and it's very relaxing out there. So, that was a big deal for the city of Baraboo to be able to have that opportunity available to them. Right now, on the other side of the river, we're getting 63 nice apartment units being constructed. It's about a $6 million construction project. And that's going to bring 63 families or individuals, whatever, that are going to have their apartments with nice views of the river. It's just, we built our new city hall right along the river bank. So, we're seeing development occur that would not, in my estimation, have occurred with all of those mill ponds on it, because all it was just stagnant water. It really didn't have any eye appeal. But now with the ripples and the sound of the moving water, I think is just very soothing for people. The Riverwalk also is uh, heavily used. Hundreds of people a day.
Mhm. And you also have the Ice Age Trail along the river, don't you?
Yeah. So when we built the Riverwalk, when we started, we had a plan and worked the plan, obviously. When the Ice Age Trail people came up to Baraboo and saw what we had, they asked us if we would, consider having the trail run along the Riverwalk. We said absolutely. So right now, the Ice Age Trail and the partially constructed Great Sauk State Trail that's going to run from Dane County up through Reedsburg and then connect to the 400 trail. That's probably going to be a 15 to 20-year build out, because you've got all of these different municipal entities that it's got to meander through. But I mean, it's really going to be a destination. And you talked about the Kiwanis before, and they're taking on the the Riverwalk project. So the way it's been working is this: when we get a segment that we're going to improve, we will go to the stewardship people at the DNR. They will fund 50% of the cost of whatever it is that we're doing. Then 25% comes from the city, and 25% comes from the Kiwanis. So that's how we do it. So from a taxpayer standpoint, you're getting a Riverwalk constructed for 25% of the cost that it would have cost if you would have had to do it on your own. That's tremendous savings. Last year, we put in a $400,000 pedestrian bridge over the river just east of Circus Road Museum. Very heavily used. It now forms a real nice, about a 2-mile loop that people can park in Circus Road Museum's parking lot, go over the bridge, do the whole loop, come back around through the parking lot and back to their car, and they never cross the same part of water twice. So that's pretty impressive also. So there's a lot going on.
I was impressed along the trail in Baraboo with the use of kiosks to talk about Baraboo's heritage,
Yes.
from the role of the Ho-Chunk Nation that lived at the rapids before European settlement and used it as a fish trap area, and had 100 mounds that are now underneath East Baraboo for the most part, and other historic things that are really well explained that people might never have known about. But it's like having historical markers along the highway. You can learn an awful lot by what they have to offer. I thought that was a really nice touch. I saw some of that in Merrill as well, Bob.
Yeah.
And the city has taken over maintenance of those trails and
Yes, they have.
in Merrill too as well, right?
Yes.
Um,
Prairie Dow's Dam had a lot of gradient, so there's not many trails up there, but it became a destination area for whitewater kayaking. It's a canyon with 65-foot drop, so it really is quite a good whitewater kayaking area. But the Ward Dam is a lower gradient, so the 2-mile section that was impounded became 2 miles of trail on one side of the river and 2 miles on the other side. The Merrill High School is right on the edge of the pond, of the old impoundment. So the people from the high school use it for biology classes and for just for FIAD and walking. One of the big impacts of removal of the Ward Dam was that there were at least 60 to 80 houses below that dam that could not get bank financing for expansions because they were in the dam break analysis flood zone, the flood shadow from the dam break analysis. So even the Merrill Library expansion, the banks were reluctant to fund it because they were in that shadow of the dam break analysis. But once the dam was removed, there was no dam break analysis necessary. It just went back to the regular floodplain zoning. So a lot of those houses were able to get bank financing that they would not have been able to get with the dam in place.
Okay. Let me ask, since those rivers are paddled and they're fished, is there any conflicts between paddlers and anglers on those rivers?
We haven't seen much of that in Maryville.
Okay.
I've not seen that on the prairie.
Yep. Okay. And Heath, you'd only be able to have a 1-foot kayak on 18 Mile Creek, right?
Yeah, you're more likely to see kids playing in the creek and maybe some inner tubes, but not much for kayaking there. So
Okay.
they do play down
Okay.
there quite a bit. A lot of youth down by the stream playing around during the summer and stuff like that. But I think that's one thing that's beneficial is getting people out of the house and enjoying the outdoors, and those definitely old impounded areas allow that opportunity. So
One thing about Prairie Dells with the conflicts is that the kayakers are there at really high flow. They want to get there in the springtime or when major rainfall, so they have major holes and all sorts of hydraulics. The fishermen are not there during that time of the year. They don't want high flows, so they're at a separate time period hydrologically.
Yeah. Let me ask how, if any of you have any observations about how the dam removals are. No. Before we get to that, I have a question for Mike. Mike, are you seeing the interest in more use of the river and more use along the river? Is that primarily local people, or is it people from outside the community that are coming in as visitors?
Oh, we're definitely getting both. I think, is it 50-50? Is it more, people coming in or locals? That's really hard to gauge, but I can tell you that we do get people that are coming up here to do a weekend's worth of paddling. And we also have people that come up here, or the people that live here, that are doing exactly the same thing with fishing. So, with Devil's Lake right down the block and the Dells just north of us, I mean, we see a lot of tourists and a lot of tourism. And, so some people might come up to go to the Dells, but, after a couple days, they're ready to try something else. And, I think that, having the river amenity that we now have, that attracts people to come and stay.
Well, and your area is rich in attractions, and some more are coming. The former Badger Army ammunition plant down the road is going to be 7,000 acres of public land that's going to be available soon. And you have those beautiful clefts, Parfrey's Glen and other places along the bluffs. And just to the east up the Wisconsin River, you have Aldo Leopold Shack and the Aldo Leopold Foundation. So I can see a wonderful day over there with lunch at the distillery, a walk through Devil's Lake and the Shack, probably late afternoon at the Wollersheim Winery a little bit down the road, and then toddle to a motel room. So
you just signed an advertisement. That's exactly.
Well, let me ask if you have any reflections on how your dam removals in your communities may have equipped the river or the communities to be better able to deal with what they talk about as far as future manifestations of climate change in the state and the area.
I think that, in particular, the fact that we have eliminated the dams and allowed the river to be free flowing in the case of high water, you know, the water right now is able to, you know, get to where it needs to go, which is the Wisconsin River, at a much better time frame than it did before. And I think that, you know, as far as um, increasing the amount of diversity on the river with the different fish colonies and wildlife that we are now seeing certainly helps try to mitigate some of the negative effects that climate change has.
The Ward Dam was in a city of Merrill, which is about 8,000 people. And yeah, I think the idea there was that there were backups routinely in the storm sewer system in that city. And, you know, it would start with the pond and then move back up the system. Now with the dam removed, there's a 120-acre flood retention zone down there that wasn't there before. Several feet of head have changed the amount of water you can accommodate. And one of the big impacts in northern Wisconsin of climate change is a substantial increase in the amount of rainfall and the episodic nature of large rainfalls that cause some real problems for municipal systems. So I think that stormwater management has been improved after the dam is removed in Merrill. And I think that the river itself is more diverse. Diverse systems are more resistant to all kinds of stressors, including climate change. So it's got to impact or improve the fisheries' ability to manage change if it's more diverse.
Bob, with these high intensity, short duration events that we've been seeing that, you know, Mike and Baraboo had to deal with huge, practically state record, all-time record rainfalls a few years ago. We did over here. Are those homes that are downstream from the former dam in Merrill at less hazard now?
Well, the dam was in such poor repair after 100 years of very little maintenance that dam was ready to go just about any time. As I mentioned earlier, before the dam was removed, they had already paid in the previous year $100,000 in flooding damages because one of the gates got stuck and they couldn't open the gate enough to pass the water. It was that bad. In addition, the dam was not designed for the amount of water that watershed yields now. There is more water, and the episodic nature of the floods are greater than when the dam was designed back in 1905. So, you know, the combination of poor maintenance and more water and more episodic flood events, I think creates a greater hazard for those houses downstream if the dam had been retained.
Okay. Heath, anything to add beyond what Bob had to say?
No, I just think like for trout streams, obviously the impoundment creates a negative thermal impact on the trout stream, trout in cold water. If you have a small to medium sized or even large dam on a trout stream, it warms the water up. So removing that structure, you're going to see a thermal benefit for the cold water fish community. And with, you know, forecasted predictions and increase in climate and things like that, that's going to benefit the trout fishery by having the impoundment removed. So
Okay.
well, the only exception that might be the Bighorn River in Montana, Duke. That's probably the one dam you wouldn't want to take out to maintain a trout fishery. But,
That's right. That's right.
In most circumstances, it's a positive impact on the trout stream. So
Sure.
And I think in addition to warming the water in the summer, you get colder water in the winter, which adversely affects egg development for salmonid. So, you know, it's a double whammy. Too warm in the summer, too cold in the winter. And, you know, it's not good.
Yeah. Let me ask probably Mike this question. Mike, in addition to the Kiwanis and DNR and the city already mentioned, what other agencies or organizations were partners in the removal and the post removal on the river?
Well, we had a group that we formed. It was called Citizens for Waterfront Revitalization, and you know, we had a lot of old structures on the river. The city built up along the river. I mean, that was the founding of the city. Obviously, was because of the water power. But there were a lot of old derelict, you know, structures and back in the day, a lot of sanitary sewers emptied into the river. It was just, people used it as kind of the back door of the city and really didn't pay a lot of attention to it, and we knew that was wrong. And with the dams coming out, this group, and it wasn't a real big group, probably had about 20 active members, but we did some things. We called it the Baraboo Rapids River Days, where we had different activities and educational opportunities along the river. Walleyes for North America came in and had a fishery for the kids. Each child that came got a fairly decent Zepco rod reel to take home with them, and each kid had an adult fisherman with them. Showed them how to bait hooks and where to fish, and do all of that stuff. And it was a tremendous reintroduction of the river to the residents. I think that was key in getting people to be reintroduced to the wonderful river that ran through their community, instead of just, the only time we'd see it is when they drove over the bridge. And now we're seeing people walk along it. We're seeing people fish on it. We're seeing people canoe it. It's wonderful.
Good, good. We're getting down here, and I don't want to tax people's time more than we intended to for this hour. But would any of you like to talk about what you see as the greatest opportunities for these communities going forward? Mike, you've talked about the plans and the prospects. I'd be really excited if I was in Baraboo and I was a business person or a resident of Baraboo. Do any of you have ideas about the greatest ongoing opportunity and the greatest ongoing challenge for the communities where these projects have taken place?
Well, as far as an opportunity, go ahead.
Mike, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, as far as opportunities are concerned, I mean, we're starting to see people actually do new construction along the riverfront. We moved to Baraboo in 1988, and from 1988 until just a few years ago, nothing, zero, got built upon the river. When we started constructing the Riverwalk, when the dams came out, when people started paying attention to what a wonderful asset the river was, we started seeing bigger development projects happen along the river. And again, I had mentioned the distillery. We have a rail museum that's in the redevelopment area. The city hall and police station, obviously, I had mentioned. And the 63 units of brand new apartments that are being built. It's a brick apartment building. It's gorgeous. It's got balconies overlooking the river. That's bringing people right down to the riverfront. That's where they're going to live. Nobody lived on the riverfront before. Nobody. It was pretty incredible. So what we're seeing is a transformation in the way people are thinking about the river. And we're not done by a long shot in what we believe we're going to see just an economic benefit as far as increased tax base and increased activity along the river with people living there. Once those apartments fill up, and again, it's scheduled to be done either late this fall or early next spring. I can guarantee you we're going to start to see some of the older storefronts in the area get purchased, and there'll be certainly commercial opportunities for people with the families that are moving into those apartments. That's going to stimulate commercial growth.
Mike, that reminds me of Eau Claire when I moved there in 1988 and lived there for 25 years. And when I first moved there, it was still in the recovery process from the passage of the Clean Water Act. And a lot of old timers in Eau Claire just considered the rivers to be a sump. And my colleagues, my students that I graduated from high school with in 1970 who went there, I said, God, you got two great rivers there. Why do you use them? And they said, oh, you can't go in those rivers. You'd have to get your stomach pumped. Well, they improved, and by the time I moved there was starting to be a change in that focus to from looking away from the river or treating it as a refuse area to using the river. And now it has bike trails and the farmers market and new parkland and a whole new attitude toward what a river can be as the lifeblood of a community. I think that one of the really intriguing things about what's going on in River Falls is that same opportunity is beckoning. So. If we can be in a situation where we can take these older impoundments and turn them into a new asset for a community, that community has a lot of benefit to recognize out of it. Bob or Heath, anything that you see?
Well, the word impoundment, word dam was right in the center of the city. And it's really important, I think, for them to have 120 acres of open land in the center of the city that they didn't have before. There's all kinds of things you can use that land for over time, compared to the utility of that pond that was already silted in. It's really a substantial change in the downtown area, not to mention all the recreation. There were 90 houses around that pond. Every one of those houses is worth more money now. The properties are worth more now, and the potential there for people upgrading those properties is great because of the amenity of the park and a trout stream running through the park. So it's pretty substantial. When the Prairie River jumps from an average flow of 100 CFS to over 1,000 CFS, they're really happy that they got 120 acres of new flood control down there instead of backing it up in the city's storm sewer system, because the city is literally surrounding that pond.
Okay, great. And Heath?
Yeah, I just think the biggest thing is you can reconnect the community to the river. And, like I mentioned before, at Colfax, one of the biggest things I saw was the local school district getting involved in doing the environmental education in the river corridor. And that's kind of something that it's kind of neat about it, getting the community back involved in the river and kind of, seeing that restored and having those people part of that process. So that's what I would add to that question.
Sure. It's 8:01, folks, and I'm really grateful for all our speakers have had to say tonight, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. I want to thank the KinniCC for sponsoring, and if any of you, Bob, Mike, and Heath, have any concluding things to offer us, please, this is a good time to take a minute and do that.
I think I've been involved in a number of dam removals, and I think it really illustrates the difference between fear and opportunity. People fear change, any kind of change, and they translate that into opposition to projects that eventually could benefit everyone. And I think we see that over and over again in dam removal situations. Starts out with fear, anger, resentment, opposition. By the time the project is all over, people are supporting what it has become because of the amenities that result and the cost savings that result. So it's a really good demonstration of human vacillation between fear and acceptance, and eventually praise for projects.
Okay. Heath?
Yeah, I would just kind of reiterate what I said kind of earlier, just be patient with the process. There's going to be lots of ups and downs, crooks and turns, and things maybe show up that you're not expecting, but it's well worth it in the end when it's all done. And just take things as they come and be adaptable. I think Bob kind of mentioned that too earlier too, is be adaptable, and good things will hopefully happen when you're all finished. So
okay, thanks. And Mike?
Stay the course. You're going to get there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for those observations. I can tell you, having been involved in quite a number of dam debates over the years, some you win, some you lose. But the having grown up in a small town, I understand that smaller towns, my town of 1,000, had a tremendous resistance to change. and that for a lot of people that uncertainty is daunting when you start to talk about something that nobody can envision. That it's really hard to envision what a community would be like that has always had a dam in their memory, their parents' memory, their grandparents' memory, and so on, and that it's going to change. But in the long run, those communities seem to adapt and come to appreciate the asset that's there as a result of having gone through with the project. So, you know, I don't think
Remember that,
yeah,
remember
yeah.
since 1960, Wisconsin has removed 150 dams. You're not going to be the first in this. 150 communities have gotten through this since 1960.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you all for being involved, both our speakers and the folks who listened and gave us good questions. It's really been a treat to have this conversation. I'm personally grateful, and the KinniCC is really grateful for what you've contributed to Help River Falls tonight. So, thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Thanks, Duke.
Thank you. Bye-bye.